Hello, I'm Kevin Guzman. This is Miss Dorothy. So what comes to mind when World War II is mentioned?
An awful loneliness. All the men were sent overseas, and it was not good at all. It was seemed to be not enough food to go around or anything.
So it took a big impact on you? World War II had a big impact on you?
Well, for young people, it didn't really matter that much, I suppose.
Yeah.
You still were able to go to the beach if you wanted to and what have you. But in my family, my dad was too old to get back in the army for them to be chasing him. And there was nobody in my family in the beginning of the war that was drafted. Later on, my brother was. In fact, the whole family, if all the males in the families were drafted, they hadn't any choice. It wasn't a good time.
When did you move to the U.S., Miss Dorothy?
Pardon?
Do you remember when you moved to the U.S.?
Oh, yes. You're right. Let's see, it was in 1940. We were married in 43.
Your husband, right? You and your husband?
Came to the United States I had to wait over a year. There are a great many forms to fill out, being from a foreign country. But it wasn't a good trip. They had they had sent out a ship that was a troop carrier. It had gone to Japan with supplies, and when it was unloaded, it came back down to the port of Fremantle in West Australia. But there were several girls who decided they weren't going to get on that ship, so they just came back, left the port of entry, and it was bad really, because they parked out away from the pier, and they were there for 3 days waiting for laundry. See, they had dropped troops off in Japan, and they came directly down to West Australia then. But gosh, you can just imagine. And they had to take on all sorts of supplies. And during that short time that we were out in what they called the gauge roads, 3 or 4 girls just left the ship. They didn't want any part. I had a friend. I didn't know at the time that she had married an American sailor. But we met back on the ship, and it was good to see somebody that I had already known. But it was a dreadful journey over here. So many of the wives of these servicemen had babies. And you know how troops sleep. There's layer after layer of beds, tiers of them, and there was no real safe place for these women with babies to sleep. And the babies kept falling out of bed. When we got to San Francisco, there was nothing but ambulances lined up. One of the kids had German measles, and it went all through the babies on the ship, and there were a great many babies. And the strange thing about that was, when we got to San Francisco, all the husbands had been told when the ship would reach port. My husband was supposed to meet me there because he was out of the service then.
Yeah.
But got all packed up and ready to leave. No hurry. So the Red Cross, they had an office on board. They called him to find out where he was. And somehow he'd gotten the dates mixed up. Anyway, they put me on a train, and I rode down to Los Angeles. And he was there to meet me then. But so many of the women, just talking to them, they decided it wasn't the right thing to do. We shouldn't have made that trip.
How old were you when you met your husband? How old were you when you met your husband?
Let's see. I guess I must have been 20.
20?
19 or 20, yes.
Can you tell us about your husband?
Huh?
Can you tell us about your husband?
I don't know if you want to know about that. However, I will tell you, he was one of 14 children in his family, 7 boys and 7 girls. And they all graduated from high school. All the boys entered the Navy, every one of them. So he had brothers spread all over the place on ships. They weren't in the Army, they were Navy people. But what question did you ask me?
Can you? Yeah.
About my husband.
Yeah.
He was a very, very nice person. I'll tell you something that I've thought about many times. And of course, at that time, with so many servicemen around, seemed like the minute they entered a port, that one thing was what they were after, and you know what that would be. And my sister, who had an American sailor boyfriend, and I can't remember my sister's boyfriend's name, but we went out to supper one night, and the boy that my sister was with, he said, "Would you like to meet that guy over there?" Harry was sitting there alone at a table, and he had a beautiful black eye. And I said, "No, why?" "Well, he looks lonely." I said, "Well, I'm sorry about that." And then it hit me. I thought, well, that's not very nice. So I said, "Yes, invite him over and let's have supper and leave." That's the way it started. But they were no different than males everywhere, I guess. He seemed to think that the payment should be sex, and I said, "I'm sorry, that's not with me." And I told him where he could go get it. There was a street there that had nothing but houses for, what do you call them? My memory's really bad. It was, well, that was the business of that street anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
And I told him, if you want sex, let's get it out. I said, if you want sex, then I'll tell you where you can get it, but don't come to me.
Yeah.
Well, next time I saw him, he had written me, I still have the letter because it was very valuable to me. He congratulated me for standing up the way I did, and that he was terribly sorry. That he said it would never happen again. Oh, he said, you must have character and all sorts of things, you know.
Yeah.
And I was amazed, really, that he even cared about what I told him. I told him to go jump in the lake. Anyway, he was a lot different than most of the men in that time, yes.
So, thinking about Pearl Harbor, like, what's the first word that comes to mind?
There's not much I can tell you about Pearl Harbor because, honestly, he never brought up the subject. I tried to talk to him about it.
No, like, what's the first word that comes to mind when I say Pearl Harbor to you?
Oh. Bombing.
Bombing?
Oh, that was awful. Shocking. So many people were killed, mostly armed forces. But Harry, he was on the West Virginia, and that was sunk. It had been beat up so much. And he was able, it's a strange thing, not too long ago, they had a thing on television, and it was about Pearl Harbor. And it showed Hawaii, this one small inlet, where most of the sailors who could still swim made it to shore. Well, Harry was one of them, but he was terribly wounded on the top of his head, his brain. And they were waiting for medical attention.
Medical
There's a whole
attention?
bunch of them. And he said that while they were waiting there, the Japanese bombed the place. The guy next to where he was sitting was killed right now. He said, "How they missed me, I'll never know." But he was fortunate there. But it was a terrible place to be in. But I could never get him to talk about it because he lost so many good friends on the ship. We were there. He and I went to Australia a number of times, and we always stopped in Hawaii anyway. And we happened to be there on Pearl Harbor Day, not too long ago, before he died. The last time we went home. And was sad to see all these old servicemen who were hurt, wounded during that time.
Besides your husband, did you know anyone else that was in the war?
Well, I did know somebody else, but it didn't seem to matter with them. They didn't care. Harry was the only one who had a conscience, those that I talked to. And he had no choice anyway. He went where they sent him.
Yeah. No, but besides Harry, did you know anyone else that was in the war?
In the war.
Yeah.
Me?
Yeah. Did you know anyone that was in the war?
My family or
Anyone in
anyone?
general.
Oh, yes, I knew a lot of them.
A lot of them?
Kids I used to go to school with. Some of them.
Oh. Were you afraid that your family was going to be affected by the war?
Afraid there was going to be a second?
No, were you afraid that your family was going to be affected by the war?
Well, my family wasn't. It was a strange thing. I had a brother, but who was the right age, but he didn't get into the fighting forces. He was in the what they call it, medical end of it, and he worked out of a hospital. Of all places, Hollywood. The Army hospital was in a town called Hollywood back home. And but he died not long after the war, and he was the only. My sister was in the Army, but she was never overseas.
So wait, you had siblings that were in the war, right?
Yes.
Oh, you had some. Okay. So did you feel like you needed did you feel like you had an obligation to help out in the war?
No, I didn't. That's a strange thing that you ask. I didn't feel any obligation. I was probably in my late teens anyway, and having to help feed the family. Because my dad, he had cancer and he died not long after the war. No, it was before the war ended. My mom was been a widow for a long time.
Was your community affected?
Pardon?
Like where you lived, like your neighborhood community?
Oh, of course. All the
affected?
men were gone, and the things that women couldn't do around the property, this sort of thing, just had to go to pot, that's all. No, there was nobody there to do anything, not men anyway.
Where did the women have to go?
Well, a lot of women went in the Army, not so much in the Navy, but in the Army, yes. My oldest sister was in the Army, but they never left Australia.
So, considering that your community was affected by the war, did you do anything to help them out or nothing?
There was nothing we could do.
Nothing? Were you worried that the U.S. would be invaded? Since...
Didn't even think about the
Didn't-
U.S.
Just didn't think about it?
We had enough problems of our own rather than think about other people at that time.
Can I ask you, a lot of people remember what they were doing exactly when something happened. Do you remember what you were doing when Pearl Harbor happened, when you heard the news?
let's see, it was December 7th. It was around Christmas time. Well, we didn't have the means to get in touch the way that you have today. You had to go by what you heard on the radio. There wasn't any television. It had to be radio. And you just had to make up your mind whether it was good, bad, or what.
And you had the radio playing on constantly, or?
No, I don't think so. Well, we were so used to the war in our own country that I really don't think it bothered people so much. There are very few Americans living there, if any.
Where was it?
They were considered to be foreign.
Are you talking about Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
In Hawaii.
That was a shock, especially the Japanese for some reason. I think that people didn't think that the Japanese had the guts to do things like that, or the manpower, or whatever it takes. But we kept pretty keen touch about what was going on after that. But it wasn't easy because we were under watch for airstrikes and everything that happened to people, that weren't fighting the war.
Do you believe that World War II was just a war?
What?
Do you believe that World War II was a just war?
Was it justified?
Yeah.
Do you think? Was it justified?
Justified?
Yeah, do you think World War II was...
No. In our opinion back home, and most everybody thought the same thing. It was not justified.
Do you have any memories about FDR?
Roosevelt?
Yeah, Roosevelt.
Yes. I don't know about other people, but in my family, he was regarded as a very nice person. And there was the fact that he was forced into a war, and he was, let's face it, he had no choice there. It didn't lower him in people's opinion.
Back where you lived, right? Back where you lived?
Yeah.
So you think he made a good choice entering the war?
Yes, I think so.
So what about the war was important to you?
About the what, honey?
What about the war was important to you?
What about it was important to me?
Yeah.
The fact that I met somebody that I dearly loved.
Cute.
No, you had to go along with the crowd. There was not much fun at that time. Lights had to be out at certain times. There were very rigid rules that we had to obey.
Yeah.
So we just kept our fingers crossed and hoped that those that we knew and loved were in the service made it back home.
So you were just hoping for the U.S. to win, right? You were just hoping for that?
I never ever studied in school about the U.S. It was all British colonies. The U.S. at that time was foreign, like Japan.
So how did you get your information about the war?
How did I get it?
How'd you get your information about the war?
Just the radio and the newspaper.
Just the radio and the
Just
newspaper?
the radio and the newspaper.
And I'm guessing a lot of people were talking about it too.
Yeah.
You said the U.S. was foreign?
Pardon?
You said that the U.S. was foreign?
Well, it was to us, yeah. Well, like England, we were part of England, but they were foreign to us. Anybody off Australia was foreign. Well, it's like a lot of places, even today.
Did you believe at this time that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
Did I believe?
Yeah.
Well, when you heard what we heard on radio, you know darn well that they did. And pretty soon they were giving out lists of people who had been killed in the bombing and what have you. That was a terrible thing they did.
What do you remember about the years immediately following World War II?
About the world,
What do you remember about the years immediately following World War II?
the years following
World War
the
II.
World War II. Well, it was very difficult to get readjusted. And not only that, all the males, unless they were sick, were in the service. And then, of course, when they got back home, they were all looking for jobs.
Yeah.
And it was the same here. I do know that. That it was terrible trying to find a job right after the war.
It was difficult, right?
Hmm?
It was very difficult for everyone.
It was, yes.
So were you in the U.S.? Oh no, you weren't. So what was your husband's take about World War II?
What did my husband
What was your husband's take on World War
think?
II? Take, like, what did he take any actions during World War II?
Where he was in action?
Yeah, well, did he take any action? Like,
Oh,
what did he do?
well, he was a pattern maker in the Navy. I have to explain that to people. It sounds crazy, but he would make a wooden pattern, or maybe there was some part of machinery that needed a new part.
Mhm.
The old part was useless, couldn't be fixed. So he would have to make a wooden replica of it. And from that wooden replica, they don't ask me how, but they made the metal one. But that's why they called him a pattern maker. He dealt with wood mostly. And he made me a beautiful box out there in the garage.
Yeah.
Gave it to me just before he left to come home. He was very good at the work he did. He built, the house ended here. This was the back porch. 2 years after we were no, not 2 years, gosh. It must have been about 8 years after we were married. I got pregnant and had Jerry. Well then, let's see, 3 years later I got pregnant and had Bill. But we only had 2 bedrooms. So he had to add the master bedroom on there and another bath. Behind this that's where my nephew is now sleeping, I think. And he was very good at what he did. But he worked for the Department of Water and Power for a long time. You know the station they have up there by Northridge train station?
Yeah, I
You
believe.
can see it. That's where he
Yeah.
worked.
Oh, he worked there?
Yeah. He didn't go out wiring and what have you.
Hmm.
And but after the war, it was really bad here when I first came here. Everybody was looking for work, and we had to live in one room. That was our house. This one bedroom.
Yeah.
We had to walk to work. I was working in a drugstore, and he was at that time he was working at what's that aircraft place down there in Burbank?
Do you guys know that place? I'm not
Is
sure.
it Rocketdyne?
What kind?
Rocketdyne?
No.
Pratt and Whitney?
No,
No, maybe not.
it was it was been there for years.
Yeah.
But he got a job there, but it didn't last very long. There wasn't enough money to go around paying people to work there.
Did you see any propaganda throughout the war?
Oh, of course, that's always there.
Yeah. Did you see any specific type of propaganda that had a impact on you, like that made you feel a type of emotion towards the war?
I didn't quite get that.
Did you see any type of propaganda that made you?
Oh, propaganda.
Yeah, that made you feel.
We were all aware of that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you have any emotions towards?
Any what?
Any emotions towards propaganda that you saw?
No, I don't think so.
You don't believe
we,
so?
We just, they'll be proven wrong, so.
Can you tell us about the victory of World War II? Do you
The
remember
what?
the victory of World War
Oh, the
II?
victory?
Yeah.
The old President Mike Eisenhower. I can't remember too much about that because we were more into the Japanese War because the Americans were based at Fremantle. They had a submarine base there, and they had one up at Carnarvon, up further north.
Are you talking about the Pacific War?
Australia.
You're talking about the Pacific War?
The Pacific War.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not. We didn't have to be afraid with the European War.
Yeah.
Most of it was away from the
U.S.
from Australia.
Oh, Australia. Sorry.
But the Japanese, oh boy.
Yeah, they were
Yeah,
above you guys.
yeah. They had all sorts of things going on along the coast there. Of course, up around Carnarvon, there was lots of cliffs and caves and things. And people were surprised to find the Japanese in there, but they shouldn't have been. They shouldn't have been surprised. An ideal place to
hide?
hang out, yeah.
Did any parts of Australia ever come under attack by the Japanese?
Did Australia ever what?
Did any parts of Australia ever come under attack by the Japanese that made you guys scared?
Darwin did. That's on the very north end. They really bombed that. And some of the islands around there, there's a lot of islands in the Pacific around there, especially around the other side of Australia from where I live. But it was something that you had to live with. That's just the way it was. There was no relief.
What would you say your husband's opinion on World War II was?
On World War II?
Yeah.
Well, I guess a lot of them felt the same way, that it was worth fighting for, and the fact that he learned a trade while he was in there made a big difference. A lot of the armed forces, they took on certain things, and they had to really learn it. But it was easier to find jobs. Only there were so many of them. 20 men after the one little job, you know. Yeah. But I don't know, a lot of people wanted to forget that as fast as they could.
What would you say to the youth today about the war?
What could I what?
What would you say to the youth today about the war?
It would be difficult to get across to them. The youth are so different. They've never had to fight for anything, have they?
Not that I'm sure of, no.
Not against their will, like being enlisted in the army. They didn't have a choice. When they reached 18, in they went. It was either the army or the navy. The Air Corps was a little more choosy.
Yeah, because they were new, right?
Huh?
They were more of a new. They needed more, I guess, experienced people, right?
I'm sorry, honey, I didn't.
They needed experienced people.
Oh.
They were picky.
Yes, but there so many of these men who fought in the war. It was all new territory for them. I mean, there's things that they were using and everything, and a lot of them continued and went to college or went to learn more about it when they got out of the service, which was good. But it was. I remember my husband. And me, I used to clean when I first came here. He couldn't find a job. And I used to clean. We lived in one room in a large house, and the woman rented all of the spare rooms out to ex-servicemen. So, I don't know, it was I used to feel sorry that I came over here for the first few years. And then things started to straighten up.
Well, go for it.
And did you interact much with these ex-servicemen?
Did you have what, hon?
Did you interact much with the ex-servicemen when they were here? Did they talk to you? Did you hear any stories?
No. I never, I can't remember ever meeting except was when I was busy working all the time. Harry, he went up beyond Bishop, up north here, trying to find work, and he was, something was being built up there. It was some sort of a government thing.
The ski resort?
No, it was, golly, I can't remember what it was called. Seems to me it was some sort of electrical work. Anyway, those are times that you try not to remember. It wasn't easy, but we weren't the only ones. That used to make me sick to see all the people who needed a job just to provide food for their families. Nothing doing.
What are your final thoughts about the war? What are your final thoughts about the war?
What did my what?
What are your final thoughts about the war?
Greed, I think.
Greed?
What do you mean by that?
Greed or envy. Oh, they wanted to take over places that were well into industry and this sort of thing, you know. And sometimes the thought was there that they were just downright mean. They just wanted to fight, make a name for themselves. Well, if it happens again, I'm glad I won't be here.